welcome to our virtual broadcast here at First Unitarian Church of Toledo. We're glad, as always, to see you safely at home. And next week, we look forward to seeing you, if you are able, to visit us outdoors in person for our August 12th service. Lexi Heyman Staples will be speaking to us about Toledo Pride.
That's August 15th.
15th, I'm so sorry. And that will be next Sunday.
Yes.
All right. And to stay in touch with the goings-on of our church, please be sure to sign up for the FYI newsletter. You can click in the YouTube description box to find out more. And with that?
Now let's begin our service formally. Mickey will give opening words.
These are by David S. Blanchard. Come down off the ladder. Wash out that paintbrush. Shake the sand out of your shoes. Get up off your muddy knees and give the garden a morning off. Fold up the newspaper. Turn off the coffee pot. Close up your calendar, already filled with dates and times and people and places that claim you. This church, virtually, is ready for you to fill its rooms, to create its spirit, to generate its warmth, to kindle its light. This church is ready for you to make community, to create beauty, to bend it toward justice, to serve its ideals. This church is getting ready for you to be here, honoring our past, invigorating our present, and dreaming of our future. This is your church. Here we are home. Here we are whole. Let us begin.
And for our chalice lighting, while Mickey lights the chalice, I will read When News Has Been Sad, adapted by Sharon Wiley. You whose hearts are broken, come in. You whom pain has touched, and sorrow and shock. You who have cried this week and read the news with sadness. You whom loss has shadowed, you who grieve. Come in, come in. You with hearts open to joy and hope, come in. You whom love has touched, and friendship and wonder. You who have laughed this week and felt gratitude for life's many blessings. You to whom gifts are given in abundance, you who rejoice. Come in, come in. All our hearts are broken and open. All of us here grieve and rejoice. This is our place, and this is our hour to gather and sing and cry and laugh. Come in, let us be together. And please join me in reciting the covenant of this congregation,
Love,
which we have on screen here. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now for our congregational singing, let's sing Morning Has Broken.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rains you fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet grass.
Today's story is David and Goliath as interpreted by Christopher Bice. Once there was a little girl who worried about a very big problem: world hunger. She read in the newspaper about children all over the world who did not have enough to eat. She wanted to do something about it, but she was only a little girl, and this was a giant problem. What could she possibly do that would make a difference? One day, when she was feeling sad about the situation, she told her father what was on her mind. After listening to her problem, he was very quiet. Then he scratched his head and rubbed his chin. He cleaned his glasses with a handkerchief, and then he said, "Young lady, maybe it's time I told you a story." And he began to tell her about David and Goliath. David was a little boy who had a very big problem: Goliath. David lived in a land called Israel, and the Philistine soldiers were threatening to invade his country. The very biggest Philistine soldier was named Goliath, who told the people of Israel, "If you can find one person who can beat me in a fight, then we will not invade your country." But there was no one in all of Israel who thought they could beat Goliath. "He is much too tall and strong," the people said. "The problem is just too big for us. There is nothing that we can do about it." David was surprised that no one would fight Goliath. So he went to the king of Israel and told him, "I will fight Goliath." The king looked down at the boy. He did not want to send such a small fellow to fight such a big man. Because no one else had volunteered, he said to David, "I admire your courage, young man. I will give you the best armor in my kingdom." But when David put on the armor, he fell straight down to the ground. After all, David was just a little guy, and the armor was very heavy. And so David said, "Thanks, but no thanks. I think I'll use my sling." The king was surprised by the boy's courage, and he said, "Go forth, and may God be with you." David went out onto the battlefield, and facing Goliath, he said, "I am ready to fight." When Goliath saw this little guy standing before him, he began to laugh. "You are only a boy," he chuckled, and then he began to roar with laughter. While Goliath was laughing, David put a rock in his sling, twirled it around, and let the rock fly. The rock hit Goliath in the head, and the giant came crashing to the ground. David was then a hero. "That's a great story, Dad," said the little girl, "but what does it have to do with me?" "David lived a long time ago," said her father, "but the world still has giant problems: hunger, pollution, wars. We can do something about it." He got up from his chair and walked over to the couch and began tossing cushions everywhere. "Dad, what in the world are you doing?" she asked. "I'm looking for spare change. You know how it always falls down the cushions. But why do you want spare change?" "I'm putting all my spare change into a box, and I'm going to give that money to a charity that helps feed the hungry." "But what difference will that make?" asked the girl. Well, see for yourself, he said, and he lifted up the cushions. What she saw gave her a surprise. Scattered underneath the cushions were dozens of coins, and how they shined and glimmered. Wow, she said, I never realized how much money was in our couch. It can add up, said her father. The world has a great problem, and too few think to throw stones that are close at hand. These coins could feed many or save a child's life. And if everyone used their coins to fight hunger, then we might just throw the same that would send the giant problem crushing to the ground. The little girl smiled, and then she got down on her knees. Together, father and daughter gathered coins from underneath the cushions. Now, please join me for a time of meditation, contemplation, and prayer. Our words today are by Laura Mancuso, and it's titled, My Commitments to Myself. We often think of others, but we must also care for ourselves. So please listen to these words. I take care of myself first because I am deserving of exquisite care. I take care of myself to maintain the capacity to help others. I move and stretch my body every day. I spend time in nature, attuning my senses to the earth's wisdom. I ration my daily exposure to the news. I identify and access credible sources of information. I protect myself from becoming overwhelmed by information about the pandemic. I pace myself. I sit with the reality of uncertainty and impermanence and allow it to temper my desire for control. I listen without judgment to others' reactions, which may be different from mine. I forgive myself and others when stress brings out our shadow selves. I feel fear fully when I am fearful. I experience sadness fully when I am sad. I allow anger fully when I am angry. I relish joy fully when I am joyful. I seek out healthy pleasures and indulge in them without guilt. I remind myself that feelings are transient states that move through me. They do not last, and they do not define me, nor do my thoughts. I balance my drive for self-improvement with compassionate acceptance of myself as I am right now. I initiate contact with loved ones to let them know I hold them in my heart. I seek out, with increased sensitivity, those who are the most vulnerable. If possible, I share my resources with those who need help to survive. When possible, I move away from people, situations, and experiences that do not serve my higher good. I strengthen my connection to my sources of spiritual strength so that I can continue to be replenished. I acknowledge the nearness of death as a key motivator for living a full life. I pray for the suffering of all beings to cease. I grieve my losses and celebrate my successes. I remain open to new ways of being, surprising sources of joy, and unanticipated discoveries every day. Let's observe 1 minute of silence, and then we will sing Spirit of Life.
Our reading today are words by Arthur Sulzberg Jr. Newspapers cannot be defined by the second word paper. They've got to be defined by the first word, news.
I'm a newspaper reader. That's one way I keep up with the world, more so than television, especially after we moved at my home to streaming video services rather than broadcast. And TV news programming doesn't engage me as well. I was never so immersed in newspapers that my fingertips were constantly blackened by its ink rubbing off. And Most of my journalistic work and study was with magazines, but magazines don't have the immediacy of a newspaper. I predate digital newspapers, but I don't insist that ink on paper is the only way for lasting news to be delivered. And digital can be better for breaking news because it can be updated. When I worked at The Blade 5 years ago as the religion editor, before this congregation called me to be its minister, The Blade still published on paper 7 days a week. Now it's down to Thursdays and Sundays only. If you read newspapers, you have to make the transition, like the papers themselves are doing, to digital format. I subscribe to the digital-only Blade here in Toledo. I also subscribe digital-only to the New York Times and the Washington Post. Or, if you want to be technical, this church subscribes for me. So, thanks for handling expenses like this. I read each paper regularly, not all the way through page A1 through each section to page E8 or whatever, and not even every day always, but I note the headlines and stories of interest to me and for the general tenor of the news. Sometimes by way of others posting Facebook links, and I can go to my subscribed papers to read all about it. And by the way, a digital paper is not as easy as a print edition to read all the way through, because there is always the possibility of stories being updated or changed in other ways throughout the day. Let me trot out these 3 proverbial sayings about newspapers and religion, kind of a tangent to me and digital newspapers, but as I've been a member of the press and am giving a newspaper-focused sermon, I ought to include these. They say newspapers are the rough draft of history. On digital, it's even rougher. I'd say there's the temptation to put something out there sooner rather than waiting to verify details. And then, once published, if not in print, the story can develop and change. And sometimes it's not history so much as noting something happened and it could go nowhere from there. The rough draft of history is the lives we live, isn't it? Finding our place in the world. There's the saying attributed to 20th century theologian Karl Barth, preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. That saying often stops there, but Barth had actually put it a little differently. He said, take your Bible and take your newspaper and read both, but interpret newspapers from your Bible. I'm not one to give the Bible or other scriptures primacy over the stories of the human condition, over news. All perspective is not biblical, in my view, but it's good to relate to this world by way of news. If you're going to make some kind of spiritual connection. The third saying is attributed to in different ways, including the job of the newspaper is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, and the business of ministry is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I found sourcing on that, and it originated with the newspaper. A Chicago journalist and humorist, Finley Peter Dunn, made that a quotation of a fictional character he used in his columns, a 19th century Irish bartender named Mr. Dooley. I learned in a piece at the website pointer.org by David Shedden that the original quote appeared in the 1902 book Observations of Mr. Dooley, and the line was a little bit different. The newspaper does everything for us. It runs the police force and the banks, commands the militia, controls the legislation, baptizes the young, marries the foolish, comforts the afflicted, afflicts the comfortable, buries the dead, and roasts them afterward. The affliction quotation might have become famous because it was a Spencer Tracy line in the 1960 movie Inherit the Wind. I learned that from This Day Quotes website, This Day in Quotes website, where I also got details of the Christian version. That in 1944, a Virginia pastor, Frederick W. Burnham, in a newspaper editorial, attributed the saying to an unnamed young minister. Regardless of area, newspaper, or religion, let's hope for more comfort than affliction. Let me stick with the church angle for one more moment. My Facebook memories page told me today that 5 years ago, I had read Blade staffer Mark Zaborni's obituary of one of my predecessors in the Toledo Unitarians pulpit, Waldemar Argo, who died in 1996. And I noted similarities. He was a reporter in Detroit and a researcher for Reader's Digest. I was a reporter in Toledo and a copy editor at TV Guide. We've had other journalist ministers in our congregational history too, going back to Francis E. Abbott, who was a founder and editor of The Index 151 years ago. You got to know me when I was the religion editor for The Blade, our local newspaper, which I joined in October 2012 and left in January 2017, taking up the position here where I'm now senior minister of First Unitarian Church of Toledo. Before my Blade time, I had ended up being an overeducated journalist, having a bachelor's degree in magazine journalism and a PhD in mass communications research and media administration, concentrated on magazines, not newspapers. And then I went into ministry. Was I looking for affliction rather than comfort? But you called me to be the Toledo Unitarians minister, and the balance of life is better. Thank you. And now I'll say a bit more about me and digital newspapers. I love digital newspapers better than actually printed. The ability to follow links and otherwise engage online is a help to me. What I like about digital newspapers is the tech-enabled ways it gives me news. With digital, there's no more letting the papers accumulate, but my saved items lists are ever growing. I probably ought to make you aware that the ability to save stories means they'll come up later on Sunday mornings for sermons. And a few subjects and topics are in the works. There are some ties to philosophy. I'll likely be preaching on loneliness and happiness and other human feelings early in 2022, based in part on some current research reported in the newspapers. and there is plenty of commentary that will make its way with my own comments. I virtually get the morning papers delivered. I don't have a set newspaper reading routine. It's not coffee and the paper necessarily, though news and caffeine seem to go very well together. Sometimes mine isn't a wake up to the world approach of getting the news first thing, but instead waiting until I have screen time and opportunity to at least glance through the headlines, if not read some stories and save others till I have more time. Without paper, it's no longer turning the pages and going section by section, but reading a few articles, saving a few others. Not that it's any help to you and your reading of news, but here's my process. It's not always in the same order, not related to which publishes first, or if I'm reading for particular perspective of the Times, the Post, or the Blade. Not local to global or a particular topic. What's the news is more general for me than the news about something in particular. For the Blade, I usually go to the editor's picks screen, kind of a page one aspect as I view it, and I scroll down to see the array of stories from breaking news to features to sports columns. The editor's view is kind of general. I pretty much ignore the Blade's news slide app unless I want to share an article, because I've heard through, though not confirmed, that sharing via news slide means you bypass a paywall. And I go to the e-Blade, the digital form that's laid out as if it were a regular newspaper, only if I can't find what I'm looking for in the Blade digital app, like sometimes letters to the editor for a particular day. The Washington Post has a top stories page, my go-to, and the next screen over, which I also surf, but just not as frequently, is Discover, a different presentation of stories in the paper, kind of an icon headline for every story, and that picks up a few that won't go into top stories. There are other section headings too that I could explore, like Race and Reckoning. The third way for me to get into the Post is the My Post button, an algorithm that shows stories that I guess, based on my browsing history, there might be of interest to me. One or two articles I want to read might pop up alongside the ones I read in the top stories format already, but most I'll either have already read or don't have enough interest in the topic, and the algorithm hasn't been helpful. The New York Times sections I go to are Today and For You. I got to the Times last for this talk, and it seems short shrift, as I probably spend more time reading the New York Times than I do with the other papers. All three of my papers have handy places to click to save the article so I can read it later, and I'm a heavy user of the save function. I really ought to be a heavy reader of the saved articles too, but they continue to pile up. You might have different newspapers if you're also a digital reader. I've chosen not to subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, for example, in part because its conservative editorial angle is counter to my liberal one, and I don't want to slog through much of that while winnowing out some of the fine reporting there. Your local paper could be different. I haven't chosen to subscribe to a hometown paper, if I choose a hometown like Austin, Texas, because I lived there 15 years, as a young adult? Or is the New York Times my hometown paper because I was in New York City for 10 years, and for a time I did subscribe to the Times on paper? Now Toledo is my hometown, isn't it? I have a press history here, and I've been your minister longer than I was the Blaze religion editor. So yes, the Blade will stay on my subscription list. You might say that reading the newspaper is a practice. I wouldn't go so far as to make it a religious practice, though you might be reading regularly, religiously you might say, in a manner you've developed, with some discipline or order. But just because both religion and press are in the Constitution's First Amendment doesn't make them the same, though I might accept some kind of cousins connection. Reading journalism is not religious practice, but I'm more open to the term spiritual practice, as reading the paper for many of us is a way we've developed to be informed about the world we live in, having our own Unitarian Universalist religious and or spiritual perspective of focusing on this world we know rather than speculating on what's to come. Knowing that we can try to build beloved community here and now rather than hope it's part of an eternity we might enter after our earthly deaths. You can do that sometimes well in the digital realm. It's all ether, isn't it? You know that your minister has a base in news. You don't have to be like the minister, but please do appreciate in some way where I come from, my approach, that through news I bring the world into our religious lives. So be it.
We come now to our time of offering. Here at First Unitarian, our mission is to foster spiritual growth and compassionate action. If you would like to work with us as we bring toward our realization of becoming a vibrant spiritual community that achieves growth, visibility, and relevance, please consider contributing online or at our Glendale address. You can find us at uutoledo.org or here at 3205 Glendale.
And now for the coming soon portion, our preview of what's to come. Next week, our 9:45 a.m. Spiritual Adventures Forum is going to feature Lexi Heyman Staples. Lexi is a child of this congregation. She has been here since she was 2 years old, and she is the executive director of Toledo Pride, as well as director of the Collingwood Art Center. So Lexi will be talking about Pride then, and then at our 11 o'clock service, outdoors in our backyard, Lexi will be our preacher as well, speaking on the title I gave her, Lexi Heyman Staples, and Pride.
I look forward to seeing you on August 15th at 11 a.m. Immediately after today's service, please join us on Zoom for our virtual coffee hour. That meeting passcode and ID is linked in the YouTube description. If you click See More, you'll see it there. And a special invitation to the visitors, if you haven't had a chance to meet us virtually, please drop in, say hello, bring your favorite coffee or tea, and we'll get to know each other. With that, I have these closing words by Gretchen Haley. It's called Forged in the Fire of Our Coming Together. What's going to happen? Will everything be okay? What can I do? In these days, we find ourselves too often stuck with these questions on repeat. What's going to happen? Will everything be okay? What can I do? We grasp at signs and markers, articles of news and analysis, Facebook memes and forwarded emails, as if the new zodiac, capable of forecasting all that life may yet bring our way, as if we could prepare, as if life had ever made any promises of making sense or turning out the way we'd thought, as if we are not also actors in this still unfolding story. For this hour we gather, to surrender to the mystery, to release ourselves from needing to know, the yearning to have it all already figured out, and also the burden of believing we either have all the control or none. Here in our song and our silence, our stories and our sharing, we make space for a new breath, a new healing, a new possibility to take root. That is courage, forged in the fire of our coming together and felt in the spirit that comes alive in this act of faith, that we believe still a new world is possible, that we are creating it already, here and now.
And let's send the flame today onto screens, on social media, that our Unitarian Universalist outlook may help to make a better world.